So the Oscars are almost upon us. In fact, if everything goes right with my video editing, they should be here tomorrow. Boy, wouldn't that be something? Finishing a video on schedule. A boy can dream. Anyway, I stand by what I said in my Last Jedi video last year, in that awards shouldn't affect your enjoyment of a piece of art. So, knowing how the Academy works, it's pretty likely that all the movies we think should win won't, and the same movies that have been winning the awards over and over for the last 100 years, except this time all in one shot or with a DC comic book character, are going to win. But this is my channel, so I'm going to tell you why, of all of the movies that came out last year, Jojo Rabbit is the one that should be winning every single award, instead of 99% sure, probably 1917, Best Picture 2020. Do bear in mind, I haven't seen Parasite yet, and from everything I've heard, that's also an amazing movie, so it's definitely on my list to check out. Unlike some of the bigger budgeted nominations that are on the Best Picture list, I think that this movie really stands out, especially in 2020, and it does so with both its big and little stuff. It's the broad and the narrow strokes with which the film comes together as a whole. It's the storytelling, the cinematography, the set design, the audio, it's everything. And so before we get into those, a warning, there are plenty of spoilers ahead. If you want to see the movie, go do that. Well, pause the video first, go watch the movie, then come back to this video. That's the order. So let's start with the big stuff. Fascism. The movie opens with our main character, Jojo, gleefully skipping down the street, Heil Hitlering everybody he's walking by to a happy tune in a weird, twisted mirror of Beauty and the Beast's Bonjour song. And in this opening, I think Jojo Rabbit shows why it's such a powerful movie. It tackles a challenging, disturbing moment in history through its most infantile form, through the eyes of a child.
Heil Hitler. I wish more of our young boys had your blind fanaticism.
The camp where the kids in the village are taught to kill and torture is both hilarious in its ridiculousness, but also shocking, because the Hitler Youth Program was a real thing that taught young children violence and hatred. By portraying it in this way, Jojo Rabbit illustrates how absurd and stupid the language used to other groups of people really is. Over the course of the movie, Jewish people are likened to blood-sucking vampires and mind-reading devils, something that is really, really shocking for a young child like Jojo.
Jews can read each other's minds.
But how would you know if you saw one? They could look just like us. Hi.
But to us, it's totally laughable. It's language that should be scary to a child, but there's no way it should be taken seriously by anyone. And yet, it was taken seriously. The whole German population fell under the spell of this kind of language, finding groups of people to demonize and hate, even though the reasons for that hate, when laid bare like they are here, are total stupefying nonsense. And the thing is, that kind of language is still being used today. Whether it's being used to ban entire religions from countries or to justify putting children in cages where they are willfully mistreated, the language used by the Nazis in Jojo Rabbit is still all around us. At the start of the movie, a German language version of I Wanna Hold Your Hand by the Beatles plays over footage from actual Hitler rallies from 80 years ago. It's a scene that's incredibly disturbing because how that footage from so many years ago mirrors what we see today. A reality where a demagogue stands on a stage preaching hatred and racism while being adulated and applauded by mesmerized crowds. It made me feel physically sick. And all the more so thanks to the movie's use of Rebel Wilson's Nazi character.
Time to burn some books!
Though her character is often used to satirize the stupidity of Nazi culture, like when she brags about pumping out half a dozen children for the fatherland, it all takes a much more twisted turn as the movie nears its end. When the Americans show up in the village, she gleefully hands a small child a live hand grenade and tells him to go hug an American. And in that moment, the movie makes it really clear that it doesn't think that people who follow fascist ideologies are really in it for the ideas. They are in it because they lack empathy. They're totally willing to blow up a kid of their so-called pure race as long as it means that they get to kill some of their hated enemies. Because ultimately, that's what drives those who fall under xenophobic, totalitarian ideologies. They always claim that it's about protecting their values and morals, but it's not about that. It's never about that. It is pure, unadulterated hate. And by using the past as a mirror for the present, Jojo Rabbit says far more about where we are today than is comfortable, which is what I think makes it far more impactful than many of the movies on the Best Picture list.
People used to say a lot of nasty things about me. Oh, this guy's a lunatic. Oh, look at that psycho. He's gonna get us all killed.
But now on to one of the smaller strokes of brilliance in the movie. One of the most shocking parts of the film is when Jojo's mother Rosie is killed and hung in the town square for being part of a resistance against Hitler. Before this happens, near the start of the movie, we're introduced to the people hanging in the town square, and we get a shot of their shoes lightly swaying as Jojo looks up towards them. From that moment on, there are several scenes where Jojo is talking to his mother where we get similar looking shots. Jojo is either lying on the ground or looking up somewhere, and his mother's shoes are in frame just above him. From memory, this happens when they're talking at the pool and as well as down by the river after. And so when Rosie finally meets her fate, we never see her full body. We see a very similar shot of Jojo looking up and her shoes hanging in frame. It's not the most complex of things a movie has ever done, but it's a little bit of cinematographic foreshadowing that shows how meticulously crafted and well thought out this movie really is.
Your mother took me in. She's kind. She treats me like a person.
But lastly, and back to the big ideas, where Jojo Rabbit really shines is in its heart. More than anything, more than the hatred and the fascism, this is a movie about love, and it explores that through two key relationships. In the relationship between Jojo's mother and Elsa, the Jewish girl she's hiding in her house, we get some of the most powerful moments of dialogue in the entire movie. Their conversations range from sad to heartwarming, but more than anything, what they are is deeply human. And at a point in the movie where Elsa has started to lose all hope, Rosie sits her down and delivers some dialogue that I think is the most uplifting dialogue I've heard from a movie in a really long time. She tells Elsa that the way to beat the Nazis is by living, and not just surviving, but living life to the fullest. She tells Elsa the story of when she was young, of how she took risks and she traveled and she fell in love and she looked a tiger in the eye. And in that moment, we see hope and we see empathy, and it really hit me really hard. I was in the middle of a crowded theater just silently crying in my seat. And I think all the more so because their conversation echoes what so many Holocaust survivors have talked about. They beat the Nazis by living. Long after Hitler was dead and buried in the ground, they were traveling the world, falling in love, and sharing their stories. You beat them by living. And most importantly, probably the most important message in the film for those of us living in the here and now of 2020, Jojo gets over it. From the moment he starts talking to Elsa, his imaginary Hitler best friend is doomed. Because when he sees and realizes that this supposed hated enemy is a real person just like him, How can hate have a hope in the world? And so Jojo starts to love a person he is supposed to hate. Over the course of the film, he goes from someone who's been taught that the Jewish people are boogeymen to be afraid of, to realizing that there is no such thing as blood-sucking vampires and mind-reading devils. There's just people. People who have their hopes and all of their dreams, and who just want to live happy lives. In taking this turn, I think Jojo Rabbit hits much harder than if it had been a more nihilistic or pessimistic movie. Instead, it sparks in us hope. Hope that because hate is something that is learned, then it is something that can be unlearned. And while those who used to be hateful certainly deserve a big ol' slap in the face like Jojo gets from Elsa, the film envisions a future where we can all accept and love each other. A future where we can all dance happily in the street. Yeah, I really struggled to come up with a comedy bit here for the end credit scene. So just watch this movie, guys. It's really, really good. And it's probably worth your time more than the Oscars ceremony actually is. You can just look up who won on a recap article later sometime. This movie will make you feel something. Both good and bad, and wrong and right, and it's really good.